Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Collins, and I'm the Dean of SMU Dedman School of Law. And it is my privilege to introduce our next panel on pathways to the profession, hiring for law firms and corporate positions. We have an incredibly vigorous and wonderful panel of speakers lined up for you. I'm going to introduce them all now in alphabetical order. Then each panelist will go ahead and make a presentation of about 10 minutes in an order we've agreed upon as a group, and then we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to begin by introducing Jim Leipold. Jim is the Executive Director of the National Association for Law Placement, a position he has held since 2004. Prior to joining NALP, Jim worked at the Law School Admissions Council. Prior to that, he was the Director of Admissions at Temple University School of Law and was also an instructor in legal writing and research. Jim speaks and writes frequently on trends in legal employment for recent law school graduates and is a magna cum laude graduate of Brown University and Temple University School of Law. Thank you for being with us. Chequan Lewis is the Chief Equity Officer for Pizza Hut. In this role, he champions and guides the company's equity and inclusion vision and initiatives across Pizza Hut's footprint as a franchisor, employer, and community pillar. A Harvard Law School graduate, he is a former business litigator at Baker Botts. Before becoming an attorney, Chequan graduated from Howard University and worked in business management with McMaster Car Supply Company. He is committed to civil engagement and has worked with the office of former Dallas Mayor Mike Rawlings to analyze economic revitalization efforts in South Dallas, and also served as chairman of the City of Dallas's South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund. He currently serves on the board of directors for both the Dallas Zoo and City Square, and on the board of advisors for the SMU Dedman School of Law, Robert B. Rowling Center for Business Law and Leadership. He is a presidential leadership scholar and a recipient of the Dallas Business Journal's Minority Business Leader Award. Jami McKeon is the chair of Morgan Lewis, the first woman chair in the firm's 150-year history. Jami was elected unanimously to a second 5-year term beginning in 2019. Morgan Lewis is the largest law firm in the country to be led by a woman. In the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, Jami launched the firm's Mobilizing for Equality Task Force to make lasting and sustained global progress in the areas of racial equality and justice. The firm is focusing on impact areas such as economic development, access to education, community engagement, law enforcement policy, and voting rights. Jami is a member of the advisory board of the Harvard Law School Center on the Legal Profession and a member of the Penn Law Board of Overseers. Among her numerous accolades, she has received the American Red Cross Lifetime Achievement Award and the United Way Women's Leadership Initiative Award. Other significant recent recognitions include earning the Paradigm Award from the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia, being honored as a Philadelphia Business Hall of Fame icon by the Philadelphia Inquirer, and ranking among the Business Journal's top 100 influencers in law. She was also named Attorney of the Year by the Legal Intelligencer and one of the 75 most outstanding women lawyers by the National Law Journal. Sandra Phillips Rogers is Group Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, General Counsel, Chief Diversity Officer, and Corporate Secretary at Toyota Motor North America. She oversees legal services and representation of the company and its affiliates. She is an advisor to the company's executive committee and a member of Toyota's global leadership team. Previously, Sandra was a partner at Morgan Lewis and Bockius, held senior legal positions at Pfizer, and was a managing partner at Shook, Hardy, and Bacon. Sandra is a founding member of the Center for Women in Law at the University of Texas School of Law, and in 2018, she received the Outstanding Alumna Award there. Her recognitions include the Legacy Award from the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law, the Burton Foundation Legend in Law Award, DCEO's GC Impact Player of the Year, Black Enterprise's 75 Most Powerful Women in Business, and 300 Most Powerful Executives in Corporate America. Sandra was also featured on the cover of Black Enterprise's Most Powerful Women in Corporate America and Corporate Diversity. Sandra serves on the board of directors for United Way of Metropolitan Dallas and MSA Safety Incorporated, on the board of trustees for the University of Texas Law School Foundation, and on the advisory council for the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and a JD from the University of Texas at Austin. And finally, Christa Sanford is a partner and the deputy chair of the Intellectual Property Department at Baker Botts. In addition to her role as the IP Deputy Department Chair, she serves as a co-chair of the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. Christa also serves on the boards of SMU Dedman School of Law, and New Friends, New Life, and is the president-elect for the Junior League of Dallas, and will serve as president during the league's centennial year in 2021. Christa regularly speaks on patent matters and is an outstanding adjunct professor here at SMU Dedman School of Law. She has been recognized as a top 50 most powerful woman in tech by the National Diversity Council, a distinguished alum of SMU Dedman School of Law, a Texas Trailblazer by Texas Lawyer, a Next Generation Lawyer by the Legal 500, a Most Influential Black Lawyer by Savoy Magazine, a Minority Business Leader by the Dallas Business Journal, and a Top Woman Lawyer by the Texas Diversity Council. She earned her BS in Electrical Engineering from Rice University in 2001 and her JD from SMU Dedman School of Law. I can't thank you all enough for being with us today. I'm excited for a really interesting conversation, and we are going to start with Jim Leipold.
Great, thank you, Dean Collins. I think Dean Collins asked me to speak this afternoon in part because recently I wrote an article in which I posited that the legal profession, based on my analysis of the employment outcomes numbers, had really prioritized outcomes for white people over Black people. It had prioritized outcomes for white law school graduates over Black law school graduates and white lawyers over Black lawyers. I think it's important. You've seen a lot of numbers today, and I don't want to overwhelm you, but I want to just share a few more numbers with you. And I think it's important to look at the employment numbers as another area where we have some real disparities, and they really matter. So this first slide, this is the one that keeps me up at night. This is the percentage of each group of law school graduates who take a first job or who secure a first job in private practice. And you can see that Black law school graduates, Native American graduates, and Native Hawaiian graduates achieve or realize first jobs in private practice at a significantly lower rate than their peers in other groups. And this is the other set of numbers that really keeps me up at night. And these are the demographic numbers for partners, associates, and summer associates, skewed at law firms across the country, but skewed really toward larger law firms. And you can see in that top line that Black partners make up less than 2% of all the partners across all law firms, and Black women and Latinx women make up less than 1% of the partners in all law firms across the board. And if we really had prioritized diversifying our lawyer workforce in private practice, these numbers could not look like this in 2020. So I want to use the few minutes that I have with you just to take a little bit of a deeper dive into those employment outcome numbers. This is hard to look at, but I think it's the shape of the picture here that's most important. This shows by each racial and ethnic group, first job employment outcomes by employment sector, and the gold lines there represent private practice. And you can see that Asian law school graduates enter private practice at a higher rate than any other group. Latinx, multiracial, and white graduates enter at about the class mean, just over 55%. And Black graduates take jobs in private practice at a lower rate, and they go into jobs in business and government at a higher rate, and they take judicial clerkships at a far lower rate. And we're going to look at each of those separately. Here you can see that for the class of 2019, and that's the most recent class for which we have complete data, there were just over 2,500 Black law school graduates across all ABA accredited law schools. They represented about 8.7% of the class. They were skewed toward women over men. Their overall employment rate in any sort of job was 85.4% 10 months after graduation, so almost 5 percentage points below the rest of the class. But here's the number that made some headlines recently, and it's one that we all really need to focus on. In terms of bar passage required jobs, so they had jobs which required a law license. They were employed at rate almost 14 percentage points below the class as a whole, and compared to white graduates, 17 percentage points below. Their median salary was less than the class median by $2,500, and you can see here again the disparities. They entered private practice at a rate almost 12 percentage points below the rest of the class, and were more likely to take first jobs in government and business. When we compare that with other groups, we'll look first to Latinx graduates. There were almost 1,000 more Latinx graduates, just over 3,500. They made up almost 12% of the graduating class, also skewed toward women, but not as strongly. Their overall employment rate was also lower, but not quite as low as 88.1%, 2 percentage points lower. Also fewer bar passage required jobs, but not nearly that gap that we saw with Black graduates. A lower median salary, but higher rates of first job in private practice, government, and public interest than the class as a whole. When we look at Asian law school graduates, a group in size almost exactly the same as Black law school graduates, just over 2,500, 8.5% of the class, more women than men in that group. There too, the overall employment rate was 4 percentage points lower, and they were employed in bar passage required jobs at almost 5.5 percentage points lower. But look at that starting salary. They have the highest starting salary of any group of law school graduates, higher than the class as a whole by over $52,000, which is quite remarkable. And that's really explained almost entirely by that next line. They went into private practice at a rate almost 7 percentage points higher than their fellow graduates. And then they were also more likely to work in business, less likely to take jobs in government. When we look at our Native American and Alaskan Native graduates, it's a much, much smaller group. There were only 117 across all of our ABA accredited law schools. So it's important not to put too much weight in the percentages because the N is so small. They were less than 0.5% of all the law school graduates in our country. They were evenly split between men and women. Their overall employment rate was about 5 percentage points lower than the class as a whole. Here too, we see that big gap with employment in bar passage required jobs, lower than the class as a whole by 13 percentage points. And the biggest salary gap, less $7,500 lower on the median than the rest of the class. Again, much less likely to start in private practice, almost 10 percentage points lower than the class as a whole, and almost 19 percentage points higher in terms of government employment, much more likely, 31% found a first job in government. The Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander group is super tiny. There were just 42 across the country, again, evenly split between men and women, a higher overall employment rate, but lower salaries, lower bar passage rate, and again, that big gap for first job in private practice. Multiracial graduates, there were 929. This is a group who self-identify as having one or more race or ethnicity that they identify with. Their numbers match the class medians as a whole almost exactly. So we really don't see much of a gap. The employment rate, 89.7%, is just 0.5 percentage point below the class as a whole. Actually 1 percentage point higher in terms of bar passage required work. Their median salary slightly higher than the class as a whole. And they enter private practice, government, and judicial clerkships at almost the same rate as the class as a whole. When we look at white graduates, by far the largest group of graduates, over 20,000 of them for the class of 2019. They were 67.2% of the whole class. More men than women, so this skew is a little bit different. They were employed overall at a rate of 92.1%, so almost 2 percentage points higher than the class as a whole. They were employed in bar passage required jobs at a rate of 79.8%, so almost 4 percentage points higher than the class as a whole. But their median salary was a little bit lower than the class as a whole. The Asian starting salary brings up the median for the class, and the white graduates in the aggregate were just below that. Private practice at just about the class median, 55.8%, judicial clerkships at a little bit higher rate than everyone else, and a little bit less likely to go into government jobs than the class as a whole. I'm almost done. I think this slide is super important. So for this slide, we lump together all people of color, which is not a great practice, but it makes a point here. And so I did it. We compare them to white or Caucasian graduates. So the orange lines are white students. And you can see that when we look at private practice employment as a first job by lawyer headcount or by law firm size, you see that people of color are actually more likely to be employed at the biggest firms, and white graduates are more likely to be employed at the smallest firms. And in fact, it's the smallest law firms in our country that have the least overall diversity. Law firms actually do a great job at recruiting students, and their summer associate classes in big law have been overrepresentative of the class as a whole for the last 3 or 4 years running. But they're not retaining those graduates each year after that first year. And so that's why the partnership numbers look like they do. And the last slide I'll share with you before closing is just a quick look at the clerkship numbers. As you know, clerkships as a first job are another important pathway into private practice. Private practice often follows a period of clerking. And here you can see the numbers show the disparities as well. 79.2% of all federal clerkships go to white law school graduates. Black or African-American graduates secure just over 4% of all the clerkships, all the federal clerkships for that class. I am going to share this slide deck. It's available as a handout. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. You can always reach out to me in NALP if you have questions. I'm going to cede the rest of my time to this super interesting panel. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Jim. And we are going to turn to Christa next.
Great. Thank you, Dean Collins. So I have been asked to talk about promotion and leadership. And as I start this conversation, I want to provide some perspective from my own personal experience. So when I was a law student, I had the opportunity to clerk at 3 pretty big law firms in Dallas. This was the summers of 2002 and 2003. And when I looked at the partnership of those 3 big law firms, there were only 2 Black partners in the Dallas offices of those law firms. So, you know, probably a few hundred partners across all 3 law firms in Dallas and only 2 Black partners. Now, fast forward to today, 2020. One of those law firms doesn't exist anymore. But when I look at the other 2 law firms that I clerked at 17 years ago, there is now 1 Black partner in the partnership at those 2 law firms. I bet you can guess who it is. Now, I don't say that with pride, but I say that because we have a ton of work to do. And 17 years later, it is beyond logic that we are still sitting here and there are not Black partners that, you know, even register on the percentage scale. Like with Black women, for example, we're below a percentage point in representation in big law firms. That is not okay. And when we were talking about how we structured this conversation, we actually flipped the order because I truly believe that promotion and leadership at law firms really impacts everything else that we do with respect to recruiting and retention. And we are really working on what can we do to improve the numbers with respect to Black partners and also Black partners that are in leadership, because that's going to have the effect on retention and recruiting efforts. Summer associates are looking at what are the numbers of the Black partners? What are the numbers of the Black partners that are actually in leadership? We've spent a lot of time on D&I initiatives focused on recruiting and retention. And I would posit that right now, we really need to be looking at how are we elevating those associates that are eligible for partnership to partnership, and how are we getting partners into leadership roles? So on leadership, let's think about that. What can we do? Well, I will tell you that law firms, if you're listening, you just need to do it. We need to just get Black partners into leadership roles. Stop twisting around the axle thinking, who's the right person to do this? What is the right time to do this? We have just got to do it. I have been in those conversations where we've been, you know, going back and forth about who is going to take on this position. Is this the right time, et cetera? Now, it would be great if the managing partner or the chair of the firm is behind it, but if you don't have that, partners, we've got to get our coalition together and we've got to start making changes ourselves too, because even if it's not with the approval of everyone else, there are positions where we can put Black partners in that will still have an impact on the firm, on the associates, with retention efforts and with recruiting. Now, I will tell you though, leadership positions are not all made equal. And I have noticed that there has been a trend to put Black partners in leadership roles that are just performative without a lot of impact. So when thinking about the roles that you are going to put Black partners in, be thinking about those roles that are going to actually have an impact on the quality of life of those at the firm, and that are going to have an impact on the conversations that we're having now and really moving the numbers and creating change. And with that, I want to tell you a story about my own personal experience and kind of how I got into my role as deputy chair of the IP department at the firm. So my mentor, my champion, my sponsor, he had been serving as the deputy chair of IP for a while. And he came to me, it was probably my second or third year of partnership. And he said, Christa, I have an idea. I want you to be the deputy chair of the department. And I said, I don't think I should. And here are all the reasons why I shouldn't. I am not far enough in my partnership. I've not built up my practice, go down the list. So for those of you who have been approached about something like this, don't do what I do. Do not say no, and do not list out all the reasons why you shouldn't be doing it. That was completely my imposter syndrome taking over and me thinking that I wasn't the right person for that role. And thankfully, being the great champion and sponsor that he is, 6 months, a year later, he came back to me and he said, Christa, I think you should do this role. And of course, I couldn't say no a second time, so I did it. And I will tell you, being in this position has really transformed my career. It has transformed the impact that I can have on others and really trying to drive the conversation on D&I at the firm. Even though, like, when I got into this role, it was with the IP department, but the impact has been huge on so many other respects. So let's talk about promotion for a bit. Now, the change in leadership, I believe, will directly impact promotion. When you have Black attorneys and partners that are at the table, when we are discussing who makes partner, when we are discussing how our partner is going to be compensated, who is going to move up the partner compensation schedule, there will be an impact. And what I've noticed in the past is that you've not had the diversity of thought, idea around the table when we are making those decisions and having those conversations. And so again, that leadership aspect and really getting Black partners into those roles is going to have an impact on promotion too. Now, as we start to go into the discussion about recruiting and retention, and Jami's going to talk about that, I do want to make a personal plea to any senior associates, Black senior associates, or those that are on the pathway to partnership that are listening today. I'm going to ask you not to give up. I know what you are going through. I know that it is hard. I know that at times you feel isolated. The path that you're on is tough. But if you do not stay, the conversations that we're having today will be for naught. The people that have gone before you need you. The people that are coming after you need you. And so I ask you, do not give up.
Thank you, Christa, for those incredibly powerful remarks. We're going to turn to Jami next.
Yeah, first, Christa, I'm so glad you said that. You know, I started in the legal practice 40 years ago. I always tell people I've had 2 jobs in my life, lifeguard and lawyer at Morgan Lewis. And when I came to Morgan Lewis 40 years ago, there were not women partners and there were not women with children. I might have been the first person at the firm to have a child. I was very lucky to have Grace Spates, my partner who heads our labor and employment group, an outstanding Black woman lawyer who was one of my peers. But there were very few people who looked like us. And I think your passionate plea to people to stay the course is so important, because just as, you know, we recruit people into the profession, they look up to see what their pathway is. And they want to see that there's a path to the future. And a lot of the people watching are that path. So I could not endorse more what Christa says. You know, several of the panelists today, and it's been a great program, and Dean Collins, kudos to you for such a terrific array of people and discussions, but several people have made the obvious point that if all this were easy, we would be someplace where we are now. So what I want to share is just some ideas and some thoughts about recruiting and retention that at least we at Morgan Lewis feel that we've learned and are trying to move forward, and hopefully they'll resonate with some of you. So first, a number of years ago, I heard a speech by a great woman named Rosemary Greco, who was the first woman president of a major bank. And somebody asked her about her views about promotion and advancement for women. She was focused on at the time. And she said that when she first started at the bank, she assumed that meritocracy was all that mattered. All you do is you get women into the roles and then the merit will show, and pretty soon everybody will be equal. And then she realized somewhere along the way that that doesn't work, that you really have to be much more intentional. And I would agree with her from my own observation. None of these concepts or desires to have a more diverse workforce are new. It's just we haven't succeeded at them. And Jim shared the very sobering statistics about that. So we've been trying to get very intentional about both recruiting and retention. On the recruiting side, 2 years ago, we decided to hire a diversity recruiting manager whose only job is to go out and help us identify and succeed in recruiting diverse associates, both from law schools and laterally, and with a particular focus on Black associates. And so we've undergone a lot of different programs to try to help us do that. And we look at the different issues city by city and the different markets. And we've really made an intentional effort to increase our diversity recruiting. So this past summer, we had 92 summer associates. We decided to hold our summer associate program virtually, in part because we knew that our students were relying on their income, but also because we wanted to introduce them to the firm. Of that group, 63% identified as diverse, lawyers of color, and or LGBTQ, and 41% identified as Black, Hispanic, or two races. And that is a much higher percentage than we've ever had. And we had a 100% acceptance rate at the end of our summer program. But we tailored that program in part to really try to show a path to people and show why coming to Morgan Lewis would lead to a successful career. And so I think it's really important to focus on recruiting. We partner in programs with law schools. We work in pipeline programs. We're very conscious of that, but the retention has to be there as well. And so we've also turned our attention to retention. And this is an area too where I think intentionality, it is clear to me, is important, because we have been focused on this for a long time. We have had a lot we have cared about and wanted to see succeed. But if you look at the numbers that Jim is talking about just coming in the door, those numbers aren't much better once people are in the door, as Christa so really aptly described. She's talking about a 17-year period. I've been doing this for 40 years and the numbers aren't a lot better. Now, we're making some progress, right? But nowhere near enough progress. So we've also gotten very granular about retention, and we're doing a couple things. First, we have a sponsorship program for our Black and Hispanic senior associates. And I have personally selected among our leaders, people on our advisory board, practice group leaders, people on my leadership team, people who I trust and hold responsible for the success of others, to pair each Black or Hispanic senior associate with somebody who is that person's sponsor. And it's somebody like, if she hadn't left and gone to be such a hot shot at Toyota, Sandra Phillips would have been a great example of that, right? Sandra Phillips, we wouldn't have paired her with somebody in the litigation practice. We might have paired her with a corporate lawyer or someone in the tax practice. And Sandra's job would be, you work on making that person successful. You're a resource where you can give career guidance. You can be an advocate and go to your peers who are the other practice group leaders and the other people and say, you know, I really think we need to get X, Y, Z, this kind of experience. And although it's relatively early, the returns are quite good because it's very much a one-on-one focus. It's how make somebody responsible for that person's success. We're doing the same thing with our mid-level associates, but we're doing it through the practice groups. So the practice groups now have their own sponsorship programs, not mentoring, which can be passive and sort of random, but again, targeted. How can we create a path for this particular person? And one of the things I do want to say about it, although maybe it's a statement against interest, is I think when we're looking at paths for people, we do have to consider that some people want a path outside a law firm. And so part of our job is to make sure that if they want to be the next Sandra Phillips, they're meeting somebody like her. Because what we're looking to do is improve things in the profession generally. We certainly need to do better inside law firms. We need better promotion. We need more success, but we also need to be counseling people in ways that we're helping them choose whatever that path is. And then for our junior associates, our diversity and inclusion committee is developing the program for them. And the last thing I'll say is about the diversity and inclusion committee. We've had a diversity committee for I don't even know how long. And originally it was the responsibility of the diverse lawyers, which was really dumb. Why would you make the diverse lawyers responsible for improving the success of diverse lawyers? Then we tried the other way and we said, we're going to make all of the non-diverse lawyers responsible. What we're doing now is we're tying our diversity and inclusion committee to our practice groups. Each practice group leader has appointed a senior member of their practice group to be their D&I representative. And what I have said to them is, I expect you to implement the things that the D&I committee comes up with, and I expect you to be informing what they do so that there's real teeth in what our diversity and inclusion committee is doing. So this is a subject I feel passionately about and could talk about way too long, but I know you and I want to hear from Sandra Phillips, so I'm going to turn it over to her. I'm happy to answer questions, and if there's not time here, anybody who wants to reach out to me, I'm easy to find at jami.mckeon@morganlewis.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jami. I love those really concrete suggestions. Sandra, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dean Collins, and thank you so much for your leadership on this topic. It's so important, and I can't think of a time when it's been more critical to the profession, so thank you very much. Let me start out by giving a quick shout out to Jami McKeon. Everything she said about creating a pathway for attorneys at Morgan Lewis to fulfill their dreams, that's exactly what she provided me when I became a secondee of Toyota in 2010, and then ultimately left and became a team member in 2012. And I think she's absolutely right. There's so much of different pathways that firms have to think about and accommodate. Likewise, I'll give a shout out to Christa, who is my stellar outside lawyer at Baker Botts. It's just a pleasure to be here. So I guess I'm here as the voice of the client. And so I want to speak from that perspective, although my career is in many different places, which gives me great perspective. I'll speak today about what Toyota is doing to advance diversity and inclusion and equity in the legal profession. You know, when I started practicing, many years ago, almost 30 at this point, I can remember being asked about why is it important? And, at that time, what was commonly said is, it's the right thing to do. And I remember getting challenged around, well, all right, it's the right thing to do, but, what about better decision-making, better business outcomes? What about that? And I was kind of like, I don't know. I kind of think that's the case, but I'm not sure. Before I go forward on that, I will say that I think one of the things that the killing of George Floyd has really impressed upon me is that doing the right thing, that's critically important. And when you think about social justice, racial justice, my goodness, as lawyers, we own justice. So I would definitely say that the legal profession must take and should take a leading role in diversity and inclusion. But where we are now, 2020. Well, I've again seen and done it all. And I can tell you that diversity and inclusion at Toyota is a fundamental key to our business success, kind of period, full stop. It's also very fundamental to how we continue to innovate. You know, we're moving to become a mobility company that's focused not on just cars and trucks, but, you know, how you get around the room with robotics, artificial intelligence, you know, autonomous vehicles, connected technology. And we need the best and brightest minds around the table to make that happen. And especially in this new era of mobility, we can't simply afford to not have women's voices or people of color or other diverse lawyers' voices around the table, because we may miss something. And the environment is too competitive to miss something. Also, our customers are really looking for us to deliver on solutions. And we've got to make sure we're doing just that. And so we firmly believe that diversity and inclusion is the way to do that. So with that as a backdrop, and that's important, several years ago, I asked my legal team to come up with a structured approach around D&I. And one of the critical aspects of it is our strategic partnerships with our law firms. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about that because I think we've made some good progress, still a lot of progress to go. But this isn't going to be a story about the firm that we fired because they didn't do blank. That's not our culture. We believe in a shared responsibility when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So, you know, whatever you give, we're going to give twice as much to make it happen. And we believe we've had good results. Now, I will say, if you're wondering, if firms don't really live up to some of their own commitments or our expectations, well, you know, maybe the phone just doesn't ring as much as it used to. You know, some companies have taken the thought of, well, we're going to get rid of you, you know. That may be a realistic outcome, but we believe that working together in a partnership, which is true to our culture, is the way to make progress. So I'll tell you a little bit about the mission and vision of what we do at Toyota when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So our mission is that TL1, which is Toyota Legal One, is committed to being a catalyst for change towards achieving equality within the legal profession. So that's a big mission. The vision is through the TL1 Diversity Committee, we will continually encourage law firms with which we do business, our legal department and the legal community at large, to reimagine their practices to improve representation of women, people of color, and other diverse lawyers. So being the process people that we are at Toyota, we employed a SWOT analysis. So we looked at the strengths. Well, our strengths are we're very well committed. You know, I'm the chief diversity officer, so that's my other job. So clearly we're committed. You know, the weaknesses is it's sometimes very hard to control what goes on at law firms. That's not something that, you know, we can do or that we want to do. We want to influence, but they've got their own way of doing business, and perhaps we'll talk more about that and what works there and what helps diversity and inclusion and what doesn't. The opportunities, of course, we've got a great environment where there's a lot of awakening around the need for equity. Some of the threats, of course, obviously, you know, there's a lot of priorities that law firms have to work through if it's not the pandemic. But also not everybody is fully on board. Perhaps they don't see the vision or don't really want to do the hard work to make the changes. But let me talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing on that strategic partnership piece. So one of the things we did is we partnered up with Diversity Lab, and they have this analytic tool that will actually help law firms figure out when they will reach parity. Women, lawyers of color, what have you, equity partnership, non-equity partnership. And so the parity is based off of the number of women who graduate from law school, people of color. And then it's kind of brought down, maybe not from the 50% mark for women, but to 30. And so we run that model. We share that with our law firms. And, you know, you can make out of it whatever you will. I mean, the bottom line, I think law firms have the power to do what they need to do. They don't need analytics to tell them that or to discourage them from it. But, you know, when we looked at some of the law firms, you know, parity's not coming until 2116. And you know, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to the firms. But it's a powerful tool to think about. If you keep doing what you're doing now, this is the success you can expect to have per this model. Again, maybe more of a thought starter, more of a challenge. Frankly, it scared the living daylights out of me when I saw it, because there was one firm that was into 5,100. I mean, you know, that's amazing. But anyway, we're trying to mix it up. And that's why we did it, because, you know, we've been doing some traditional things. This was something really beyond the pale. We have surveys. You know, we've recently committed to the ABA Resolution 113, but before that, we had a survey that was about this thick. And it's asking all manner of questions around statistics, demographics, staffing, cultural type programs. And the question I like most is there any category of lawyer that has not changed over the years? You know, and what are you going to do about it? So we have these surveys, we have these report cards. They come in, we spend a massive amount of time looking at them very thoughtfully. Then we bring in the law firms and we sit them down. We ask them about what's in their survey. We're asking them about what their biggest challenges are. You know, what countermeasures are they looking at? You know, what's their metrics for success? And it's a lot of give and take. And, you know, we actually give them ideas. We give them data. We give them resources. So if they want to start a sponsorship program, then we do it that way. Boy, we've got a lot of written communication, and Christa and Jami could sure tell you that. And I actually brought something with me. I mean, this isn't a passive exercise. So some law firms said, yeah, we're going to have a pilot. We're going to have some surveys. We're going to do some educational programs. This is what my team wrote back. Educational programs are certainly interesting, but they have limited utility in moving the needle, as they are often preaching to the converted. I mean, you know, this is the type of straight talk that we're giving our firms. You know, the pilot mentoring program looks very intriguing, but it is short-lived. You know, we'll be interested to hearing about, you know, how you move that needle. And retreats are more valuable when they have business purpose connected to them, such as client exposure. You know, we're really kind of up in the game here. And again, we're offering resources. We ourselves are resources. We're out there with webinars. We're mixing it up. But we believe it's a shared responsibility. And that's why we have a partnering program, because we really want to be a part of the solution. But one thing I'll end on is we are going to roll out a Rising Stars program. And I'm really excited about this, where we're going to have lawyers who are 2 years from being a partner kind of link up with us. And we're going to, you know, help them get to know Toyota for like a couple of days, have seminars and whatever virtually we can do. We're going to put them with a Toyota mentor. We're going to have business development skills and work with Beyond Law, which some of you may know about. Hopefully law firms will agree to pay for that. And then relationship and networking. You know, this is, again, the best way, I think, to make progress. And so I'm excited about what the future holds. You know, since we started some of these things, we've seen the number of our timekeepers go up to almost 350%. But we know there's so much more than that. To Chris's point, we got to get to the partnership, to the equity partnership and beyond. And so I'll end there. But again, it's a bit of a, you know, journey, not a destination. But I couldn't agree more that more progress needs to be made much, much more quickly.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And we're going to turn it to Chequan.
Thanks, Dean Collins. Yeah, so I mean, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to hear all these other comments. And as I think about what I could add that's unique, the approach that I'll take with my time is to kind of talk about my journey from sort of the beginning of my legal career to where I am now at Pizza Hut. And there are some pieces of that journey that I think are instructive that could hopefully be useful to the conversation. I first think about Professor Wilkins' stats about Black women that we heard earlier today and what we saw presented here at the top of this time. And that's a big concern for me, because truthfully, my journey in the legal profession literally begins with Black women. And so, there's a woman named Sean Brown, who I know is an SMU alum, who's a lawyer here in town. And she's the person who, at a coffee over Christmas break my 1L year, told me, you might really think about going to a law firm, because I went to law school after working for 4 years, pretty sure that I was going to do anything other than, profit-seeking enterprise. And she helped me think about what that could actually mean for the rest of my career. And so, Sean directed me to think really critically about that. And when I got to Baker Botts, Christa, who we've heard from today, has been, she was not more than just my trailblazer. She was sort of my Sherpa up the mountain at that time, and I'll never forget, I was out of the country the day I decided to leave and go to Pizza Hut, but I called Christa because I was like, I need to let her know, because she invested so much in me. And there's so many other women in the Metroplex who have served that same role for me. I bring this up though about this time at Baker Botts and the initial part of that journey, because even though the numbers are small, and even though the opportunities are way too few, I also hope that some of the Black women that are listening today do not take for granted the role and the impact that you can have on the trajectory of people's lives. Not just Black women, but everyone that's listening. But as I think about the minuscule numbers that we saw and the tremendous impact that it's had on my life and the way that I've tried to treat other people, I hope that we think about that power and that folks are counseled by that and continue to guide themselves accordingly. Now, at Baker Botts, one of the really critical things that happened to me in the business litigation department, though, was 3 things: great work, really hard feedback, and real investment. And now in that, just because of the way the numbers work, that came from white people. Like, let me just keep that 100, right? So if I wasn't getting the big projects, if I wasn't getting the exciting stuff, if I wasn't getting the things that challenged me and had to have a Van Beckwith or a Tim Durst be like, look, we need to figure this out a different way, I don't think that I would have grown the way that I grew at Baker Botts. And so one of the things that's incumbent upon firms, from the time that you have summer associates to the time that you bring these people into the door after you've sold them and all the things that they can be in your building, is like, what does it really mean to wrap your arms around Black lawyers once they come there? And so it's got to start with great work, but it's got to go with the hard feedback too. Because one of the things that I think kills Black careers is people being afraid to say, you know what, that didn't make sense to me. Or you know what, that could actually be better. And so one of the things that we've got to be serious about as a profession is saying that to people's face and saying it in love and actually working with them and actually growing those careers, instead of saying the stuff in the recesses of rooms that people don't always have access to. Then that next piece, though, was like a real investment. I mean, there were people at Baker Botts who I feel like were willing to throw a chair for me when I wasn't around. That was important. That actually mattered. And like, that really helped me go to sort of the next stage of my career. Now, I went to Pizza Hut in 2016. And before I stepped into the business role and then in the role I'm in now, I was still a practicing attorney. But there's a critical proposition that my transition to Pizza Hut stands for that I think a lot about, which is I felt like I was in a position where Pizza Hut chased the talent, okay? So let me make this clear for a second. So when I went from being a business litigator to my job at Pizza Hut, right? I got a job as a franchise lawyer and I was a litigator. The only thing I knew about franchising at the time was Pizza Hut was a franchise and a lot of the places I like to eat were franchised. But what really happened in that experience and in the interview process was folks really double clicked on me. They tried to figure out, what do I actually need out of this role? What skill set does this person have? And more importantly, even though he's different, what could he actually add to our environment that can make us different, that can make us better? Now, I don't believe they rounded down on the proposition that I could do the work or hit the substance, but they absolutely enlarged the territory of thinking to not just look for the word franchising or not look for the word food on the resume. They looked past the name Chequan, past my schools even, and said, you know what, I think that this person can make some sense for us here. Another thing that happened at Pizza Hut that's deeply important though, was like, I'd always had good mentoring, I think, but I really started to experience this thing called sponsorship. So here's another woman that comes to the picture. She's an SMU alum from an undergrad perspective. Her name's Lauren Leahy. She's our chief legal officer at Pizza Hut. This is a person who said, look, we're not going to do this competing thing because we're close to the same age. She said, I'm going to wrap my arms around you and I'm going to show you the way. One of the critical things that we know and we experience in our environment is that people of color and women and LGBTQ plus folks oftentimes can't figure out how to crack the codes of corporate environments. And so what Lauren actually modeled was, let's scratch all that. I'm going to show you the way, and I'm going to put you in a position so people can actually see the work that you do. So you can take away some of the thinking and the internal work that a lot of people who live outside of mainstream experience every day. She's like, let me make it easy and let me go help you do the real work. The other big thing though was getting this opportunity to shine, but also getting an opportunity to fail. Like that's a really critical thing that happened to me there. There are some deals that I did I was really proud of. There are some deals that I did where I made some mistakes because I was learning a new practice, but I also knew that the people that I worked for deeply had my back. And that gave me some permission to really think about taking risks. It gave me permission to really think about what it might mean to have a big home run for the organization and not just play scared because I was not worried about people trying to cut me off at the knees. All of what I'm describing is just entirely too rare for Black people. It's too rare for Black people at Baker Botts, if we're being real. It's still too rare for Black people at Pizza Hut. It's unbelievably too rare for Black women. But as I think about those things, that's what actually guides me in my work now as our Chief Equity Officer. I take a step back and ask myself, what does it mean to try to do work like this well? And so I begin with the proposition of thinking about equity as opposed to just like diversity and inclusivity. So let me double click on that for a second. Diversity matters, absolutely matters, right? Representational progress and the faces in the room make a difference. But inclusivity also matters, right? The idea of people feeling like they can be included, they have a place to belong, that all matters. But the project of equity is to deeply interrogate the systems and our institutions and our processes and our procedures and ask ourselves the question, what type of outcomes are they replicating? To kind of borrow from Ibram Kendi for a second, who says everything is either racist or anti-racist, I believe that everything that we do inevitably generates one of two outcomes, equity or an inequity. And so as we think about what that work means at Pizza Hut, I really try to think about that in a really intentional way. And I talk about three things all the time at work: being intentional, being authentic, and being humble. And when we do that, that really invites us and asks us to do some really critical things, some of which I've talked about along the journey, but some of which are important as we think about what it might mean to attract some of this talent in the first place. And so at Pizza Hut right now, I think about our business as in terms of who we are as an employer, who we are as a business, and also who we are as a neighbor. And then ask myself, what does that really invite us into if we're being serious about the equity project? So from an employer standpoint, it absolutely means being aware of what our numbers look like and making sure that we have the proper ambitions to be or aspirationally representative. But at the same time, the numbers aren't where we want them to be. It really demands that we take a step back and ask ourselves, what is happening institutionally? What's happening systemically that's generating these outcomes that we don't want? One of the things I'm proud of in our legal department right now, I think that we are coming close. We would never be satisfied, but we're coming close to setting standard for what it means to actually have a diverse legal department, where we have really thought hard about what does it mean to bring in our case, some extraordinarily talented Black women to come and do work. We just say, bring your genius. We'll figure out how to make it work, right? And that's a step change that I think that we see and experience certainly in law firms, but certainly in industry as well. These other two pieces though about who we are as a business and who we are as a neighbor, I think are critically important because it's been said by people at banks, we just can't find diverse talent or we just can't attract this type of talent. We've all heard this before. But one of the things that we have to really think about as large market actors is two things. One, moral clarity matters. Two, market reaction matters as well. They're not so detached as people would have us believe. But what we do know is that some of the folks that are on a call like this and some of the Black people we'd love to have in our business, they do think about who we are outside the work transaction. They do care about the way we show up for our consumers. And they do care about what it means to be a really good neighbor outside of any particular transaction. So in our business, we really think about those things because it's the right thing to do, because it's the right way to show up, and because we believe it challenges us to set up a hospitable environment where people, Black people in particular, can actually thrive. That's true of all people, but we're really intentional and really thoughtful about that. So as I just think about that journey, like the intentionality that I experienced from folks like Christa, the intentionality and the authenticity that I experienced along the way, I just take a step back and think about when I came into this role. I'm married to a Black woman who is one of these folks who's been deeply critical in this path as well. And she told me about a quote that she heard from Sandra, because I was actually wrestling with whether I would take a job like Chief Equity Officer, because one of the things, some of you may relate to it, I feared was like going from having this big role in business to taking what felt like a diversity job. And as a Black person, you don't want to be pigeonholed. But she told me that Sandra said to her one day, an opportunity to lead is an opportunity to lead. And so I'm taking it and I'm trying to lead. We're inviting people into that collective leadership project. We're being really open to what that invites us into. But more importantly, we take very serious the challenge that comes with having the opportunity to serve a broad customer base, having the opportunity to employ people of all backgrounds, and really being a company that wants to help move not just our business, not just our industry, but our society forward in the cause of racial justice.
Thank you so much. Just some incredible insight and inspiration from this panel. We're going to move into the Q&A now, and I'm going to start off by asking a blunt question, and I'll ask for volunteers to answer that. I believe one challenge to more inclusive hiring, particularly at the entry level, is our professions, and I think this is a fair term, almost obsessive focus on a very narrowly defined set of elite credentials. What rank of law school did the student graduate from? What was the student's class rank and GPA? And this is becoming an increasing challenge in Texas, where we're seeing many big law firms hiring students for their job that will be their job out of graduation in their first year of law school. So those decisions are being made on the basis of one semester's worth of grades. And many students take a while, a semester or a year, to understand law school and to really achieve their full potential. How can we address this issue, this focus on elitism?
Jennifer, you just like hit a hot spot for me. I mean, I believe that this entire profession is based on a house of cards built on reputational capital, right? So law firms don't produce widgets or anything they can sell. Their reputation is based on the collective pedigree of all their lawyers. And we've based that pedigree on things like what school did you go to and law review and all the people who've gotten into this from a Moneyball perspective and have looked at what is really the background of the partners who succeed and become leaders and rainmakers. They didn't necessarily have those attributes, but we're so collectively anxious as an industry about our reputation, about pedigree. It's true on the faculty side, it's true in the practicing bar side, it's true among the judiciary, it's true when we look at law clerk hiring. You know, we have not really, compared to the other professional services disciplines in our country, looked at what really makes people successful. What is the talent? How should we be discerning the talent? How should we identify the talent we want to hire, rather than using these proxies that are based on, you know, I think things that are not supportable over the long run, particularly if you look at it from a data perspective.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I'll just add one. Go ahead, Jami.
No, go ahead, Sandra. I'll go after you.
I was just going to say that it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy at a certain point. And that's the real damage that it creates. If someone sees someone from a top flight law school or law review experience, there's a tendency to just fall into that mode of thinking that they're the best. Likewise, if there's someone who doesn't have that credentials, they tend to fall into maybe what's not as ideal. And so I think we've got to arrest that and find another way to really, benefit and evaluate and promote talent that isn't linked to some of those factors. That's what I would offer. And I was listening to the last session where they were talking about it, and maybe there's a need to really go back and figure out why some of these meritocracies exist. There's a new book that's out. It's called The Tyranny of Meritocracy. I think the author is Mike Sheldon. And it really challenges the whole notion of merit from the standpoint that what may separate many of us is not pure merit. It could just be luck or opportunities and advantages. And so if that's what we're talking about, Dean Collins, it seems like we ought to get our hands around that and try to arrest that so that that equity can really come forth.
So I agree with that. What I was going to say is I think it comes back to the big picture versus the individual. So one of the reasons law firms rely on what they rely on is efficiency, right? There's tens of thousands. I don't even know how many law students in the country competing for jobs. People go for the easy things that they can see to winnow down the list, and then you get to here. The reason that we went and hired a diversity recruiting manager is that we realized we're going to have to do more than that. We can't just rely on all of the things everybody has relied on before, because they all drive to the same result and the same outcomes. And so we've started doing things like, for example, we hosted a half-day diversity workshop for diverse first years. We had, I think, we had 8 offices, 90 diverse first years representing 28 law schools. We covered the expenses if they came. We had something like 150 Morgan Lewis lawyers meeting people, coaching them on interviewing and all those other things, but we started to build a relationship. So some of those students, we didn't have to just look at what their grades were. We started, and we're trying to do this more, where we're out there getting to know people, because I think most of us would take a chance on anybody we've met who impresses us. You can see they're sharp. You don't want to have to rely on all those other statistics. So it's a question of how many resources, how much time and resource and expense we're willing to put behind doing something that is a substitute for the easy way of just relying on the same old system. And I think people are realizing you have to do that, because you're going to get the same outcomes if you keep doing the same things.
I think Chequan gave a great example when he mentioned how he ended up at Pizza Hut and how they double-clicked on a number of the other things beyond, his name and where he went to school, et cetera. And that's what we as law firms need to be doing. We need to go beyond just the specific metrics that we've relied on for so long. And some of the things that we're doing too are expanding out the law schools that we're recruiting at. I mean, we do a lot of recruiting in Texas, but when we're looking at the other law schools where we go to, it's a smaller number, and it's the same number that Morgan Lewis is looking at. It's the same number that every other firm is looking at. So we need to do a better job of expanding our net and trying to get additional folks in as we're going through this process. But then also we're looking at how we are evaluating candidates when they come in, or even before they come in. Why are we keeping that grade on the resume when it's going around the office? Is that necessary? No, they've already made it in. Now we need to do some behavioral interviewing. So just a few other things to consider too.
Yeah, and to pick up on that, to say it really gruffly, candidly, law firm, especially if you're listening as a firm, like, get over yourself. Like, let me be real, like, get over yourself, to be honest. And I say this as someone who's benefited from the presumption of competence because of the law school that I went to. Get over yourself and get into something deeper. Get into something that's like a little bit more righteous, which is, and it's hard. And candidly, as law firms, we aren't always good, as lawyers, we aren't always good about this, but like, take a step back and really ask yourself, what is it that I need from someone to excel as a young associate, right? Presume you're a development environment that could grow people, but what is it that really makes a young associate sing in my business? And then orient your interview process around that. Stop asking people questions about, like, tell me about a time that you liked this or that. Like, think about these things that could help you develop a meaningful proxy for what it's like to do the work. Look, I mean, we went to law school, right? Like, grades are cool and everything, but like, I don't believe that it's deeply predictive of like where I am now. And so if law firms, as much as we're willing to invest in marketing ourselves to potential clients, if we're willing to invest in talent development and talent identification tools to actually figure out like who people are and what they can do and what we really need to do work well, it might redirect some of this. But right now, lawyers are too obsessed with the way things are as opposed to what they could be, from my perspective.
Just an example of something that a simple thing. The University of Cincinnati School of Law pioneered this, but it's been replicated elsewhere. They took the job fair and turned it on its head and turned it into a tournament where they had groups of law students who were given a legal problem. They had law firm lawyers and in-house lawyers come in and coach them and then judge them on a day of interactive solving legal problems, representing clients, overcoming hurdles, looking at evidence. And at the end of the day, a whole bunch of students get offers to be summer associates because the lawyers are like, wow, you guys are really good. We had no idea. No resumes, no grade point averages, no class rank, just watching second and third year students in action doing legal things together is a much better way, as an example, of trying to identify talent.
Thank you all so much. Christa, we've gotten a bunch of questions for you, and I'm going to try and combine them into two themes. The first theme is, why is partnership worth it when the hours are terrible, the demands are enormous? What is the rationale for hanging in there? And second, what advice do you have for someone who does want to make partner, but is dealing with a hostile environment in their firm where they're not getting the mentoring that Jami, for example, talked about, or the sponsorship? The good assignments are going elsewhere. What do they do when they're in a really challenging environment like that?
Okay, so on the first question, and this is the word that drives me in everything I do, it's worth it because of the impact you will have, period. And you know what? There are days where I'm like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? I will be honest with you. But when I have the associate call me and they just need me for a moment and they need to know that they have a partner in their corner, that's why I do it. And that's why we need more of you to do it, because that's how we're going to change this. That's how we're going to change the game. Okay. And so if you will think about beyond yourself and the broader impact that you can have on this profession, on the people, that's why it's worth it. Now, if you're in a situation where it is hard at the firm, you're dealing with probably some personalities, and I get it. What I've done is I have a board of advisors, and they're there for different reasons, but it's not everybody that's at the firm, because at times you may not have that resource at the firm. And I will go to my board of advisors when I'm dealing with various situations. And if it's, dealing with a mean person, there are 2 women that I go to when working through that issue. And if you develop that additional group outside of your firm or outside of maybe the department that you're working in, that can help. And it will help you. It will help your peace of mind too, and give you strategies on how to interact and how to handle the situation and the problem.
Thank you for that great advice.
Dean Collins, can I jump in on that?
Yes, please.
Part of the discussion here is that every law firm I know, every good law firm I know is looking for diverse lawyers, is looking for Black lawyers. I think Christa's right. Try to fix a situation, but if you're in a toxic situation, if you're in a firm where you're not going to get the support you need, and you've tried those alternatives and they don't work, leave. Go somewhere else. This is a great job. It is a great profession. There are so many great things you can do as a lawyer, but no job is worth being someplace where you feel like you're not respected and you can't succeed. So I'm not saying just quit at the drop of a hat, but there are alternatives out there. Don't forget that one bad experience doesn't mean you're not going to have a fantastic career in the law.
And that relates to another question we just got in, which is that for the law students on the webinar, students often obsess about their first job and don't have sight of the long trajectory of their career. And can any of you speak to that idea of lateral hiring and the ability to make moves, and how recent graduates should think about that, knowing when it's the time to make a move?
I could speak a little bit to that. When I graduated from the University of Texas Law School in 1991, I had clerked at some law firms in Beaumont, Texas, which is where I'm from. I had a personal life change and decided I no longer wanted to be in Beaumont. So as a 3L, I kind of found myself out looking for a job. And I was fortunate enough to go to a job fair, and I ended up at Chevron. At the time, Chevron had a litigation unit. But I remembered thinking, boy, I really wanted to go to a law firm, because I really wanted to try cases. Well, here was a company that was actually trying cases. Well, maybe that was too good to be true, because about a year into it, the head of litigation group retired. And then he said, we're not going to be trying cases anymore. And I thought, okay, great. So then I ended up at a firm, which happened to be the firm that he went to. But it was a firm that was doing a lot of commercial and tax litigation. It wasn't exactly the type of litigation, but guess what? I learned some good litigation chops. I tried a case or two. And then I got into the groove of now what reflects the rest of my career. I went to a firm that had major clients were pharmaceutical, tobacco, and I did trial work and developed leadership skills. Ultimately, ended up being the managing partner of the Houston office of that firm, and then I went to Pfizer. Then I went and joined Jami at Morgan Lewis. So I think the point is you just have to start wherever it is you are, and then go from there. I mean, you know, if you don't get the job that you thought you wanted, you take a job where you can make something of it. It's the whole concept of blooming where you plant it. So that my story is all about not being able to predict one job from the next. It's just being in the right place at the right time and taking what I had and trying to make the best of it. But keep going, you know, like Christa said in her opening remarks, keep going, do not give up, because you'll connect all the dots eventually. It's just that if you come into it thinking, oh, that first job has to be that, and then that doesn't happen, and you say, okay, enough of that. No, you go into your plan B mode, your plan C mode, and sometimes it's your plan F mode that actually is going to be the thing that brings you around to where you ultimately are best. It may not be what you thought you were best at, but it's ultimately where you're best. And again, you're looking at me because that's really what my career has been all about.
And I would say too, you know, be willing to let your plan A work. You know, when I started at the firm, I told my husband, I said, I'll do this for a year and then I'm going to go take over my dad's company and get into business. I'm not practicing law forever. And I'm 17 years later, I'm still doing it. So be open-minded. It's like Jami was saying that sometimes you need to be willing to leave, but sometimes you need to be willing to stay.
When you find yourself in,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
When you find yourself in a place too, like no matter how you got there, try to have a thesis, right? And so like you can, it's very likely not your dream job, and sometimes it is. But if you think out, you know, down the lens of your narrative arc, ask yourself, okay, how could this connect to where I want to be? So for me, to be honest, I understood pretty quickly I didn't want to stay in a law firm forever. But I asked myself, okay, the thesis here is to really try to become a really talented writer and a really talented researcher, and to figure out how to get used to being dropped in environments that I don't understand and that are scary and are sometimes creepy, and figuring out how to make some sense of the facts. I figured that'd be really useful in a career in business. And so even when you, to Sandra's point about bloom where you're planted, even when you find yourself in a place, try to develop a thesis that you're working against so it can help you make some sense of the steps that may come after.
We only have about 3 minutes left, so this is going to be the lightning round. If you could leave the law firms and the general counsels on the call with one piece of advice, one strategy you really think they could implement to start making a difference in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what do you think that would be? And why don't we go in the order I had you present for this one? So Jim, why don't you go first?
I would say throw out everything you've been doing for the last 30 years and try something new. Honestly, just try something completely different.
That was a big piece of advice. Christa, how about you?
Yes, I'm in the same line with Jim. I would say be willing to accept that you have failed and now try something different.
Jami?
I would say engage the people who you're trying to keep and have them help fashion the solutions. Too many times partners try to figure everything out by themselves. We're now doing a lot of time talking with our associates. I'm having small group meetings, one-on-one meetings, and I'm listening to them. And I'm learning things I didn't know, or I'm talking about things I did know and finding new ways to approach them.
Sandra?
You know, I would say, obviously, being intentional and treating diversity and inclusion and equity just as you would how you maintain the profitability or success of your business, but also to appreciate and really get your head around that there's a difference between having a good law firm or legal organization and a great one. And I think there are many organizations that have been very good, but they've missed the boat on being very great. And the great is having diversity and inclusion. It really does lend itself to better decision-making and better outcomes. And if you can get that, then the rest of this falls in line.
Thank you so much. And Chequan.
Yeah, chase people and not resumes, and appreciate that systemic change is much better than representational progress only, because the systemic change actually invites you into asking the hard questions and interrogating the difficult things that can protect your gains in diversity and protect your gains in inclusivity.
I can't thank you all enough. Thank you for an absolutely fantastic discussion and such great advice. We will now have a 15-minute break before our last panel of the day, which is Pathways to the Profession in Judicial Clerkships, the Judiciary, and Law Faculty Hiring. Thank you all so much.